Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second workshop of the Ascension 2022 Space Conference run by SEDS-Canada. I'm Vanessa Van Decker. I'm the events chair at SEDS-Canada, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Anna Voelker and Caitlin O'Brien. They're going to run our second workshop of the conference, Sci-Access, Advancing Disability Inclusion in Space and STEM. Anna is the executive director of Sci-Access and co-founder of Mission Astro Access, and they specialize in accessible science outreach and are a Brooke Owens Fellow. Caitlin works for the Sci-Access Initiative and is a moral scholar and the president of the Astronomical Society at OSU. Please give them a warm welcome, and I'll hand that over to them.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. We are so excited to be here. So thank you all so much for having us for today's event. We're really looking forward to chatting with everyone. And today what we'll be doing is about a 20-minute presentation, and at the end, 10 minutes for interactive Q&A, questions, and audience participation. So we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts as well. So as was shared, my name is Anna Voelker. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the founder and executive director of Sci-Access and Astro Access, which are two projects that we'll be talking about today around the ideas of advancing disability inclusion and accessibility in STEM. And I'm really excited today to be joined by one of my amazing students, Caitlin O'Brien, who I'll let go ahead and introduce herself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Caitlin O'Brien. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a Caucasian woman with long brown hair. And in my background, I have a starry curtain. I am the secretary of Sci-Access Inc. and the co-lead of logistics for Mission Astro Access.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. So today's presentation is called Advancing Disability Inclusion in Space and STEM, and we'll be talking about multiple ways that we do this through the organization known as Sci-Access. So what is this organization to begin with? Well, this is something I started back in 2018 to address this severe deficit of opportunities when it comes to inclusion of scientists and engineers with disabilities. And we have four main chapters that we'll touch upon today. The first is the annual Sci-Access Conference. The second is the Sci-Access Working Group, which is an international collective of professionals that meets virtually year-round to share best practices in accessible STEM. The third branch is the Sci-Access Zenith Mentorship Program, and this connects blind high school students from around the world with astronomy and space science mentors and uses 3D models and sonification to make science inclusive. And last but not least, we have our newest chapter, Mission Astro Access, which is all about breaking down barriers to space exploration. So to start, I want to give you a sense of why this is important and why when we talk about accessibility, it's not some specific, very niche issue that we can ignore. It's actually very prevalent and prominent and something that we all need to be thinking about. So from the US perspective, when we look at the United States, we see that about 26% of the public has a disability. So this is actually very common. And yet, when we look at employed scientists and engineers, this drops down to 10%. And even further, when we look at those with STEM degrees, it's actually less than 2% of people who report having a disability. So we see this severe difference in actually looking at the public versus looking at the STEM fields. And this is really seen on a global scale as well. When we look at the world population, 15% of people around the globe report having a disability, making folks with disabilities the largest minority group in the world. And yet there are severe misunderrepresentations across the board. And one common reason for this is that oftentimes institutions and companies will object that accessibility accommodations are too costly, when this is really not the case. In fact, 59% of all workplace accommodations cost absolutely nothing to make. So this is something that we see is really a myth that we're looking to debunk. And what we want to do is advance these accommodations as well as innovations in terms of how we make STEM inclusive. And so that's really why we founded Sci-Access to begin with. And the first chapter that we'll talk about today is the annual conference. So to tell you a little bit more about that, I'm going to turn things over to Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. So the Sci-Access Conference is an annual event that brings together community members to help share in progressing accessibility in STEM. On screen right now is the Sci-Access logo, which is two blue hands in the symbol for sign language interpreting, surrounding a glowing blue atom. Now, the SEDS conference began in 2019. This was the inaugural conference that really started off SciAxis Incorporated in general. It was hosted in person at Ohio State University with 250 attendees in total, which consisted of students, professors, researchers, and members of the general public. We had 60 speakers over the course of this event, including 2 keynote speakers, Dr. Temple Grandin, who is a renowned autism advocate and professor of animal science, and Anusha Ansari, who is the first female private space explorer, first astronaut of Iranian descent, and the first Muslim woman in space. On this next slide, we have a photo from that event featuring our mascot from OSU, Brutus Buckeye. Our next conference was SciAxis 2020, which was hosted virtually. Speakers returned from SciAxis 2019 to give updates on their work in accessibility, as well as new speakers who we introduced to the community. Our keynote speaker this year was Dr. Soyeon Lee, who shared her experience as the first and only South Korean astronaut. We had over 1,000 registrants for this event and 555 participants over the course of the day. Finally, this past year, as with 2020, we held SciAxis 2021 in an online format, this time partnering with Geneva Lake Astrophysics and STEAM, or GLASS Education, who were co-hosts for the event. GLASS is a Bulletin Award winner, which is the highest honor bestowed by the National Federation of the Blind. Now, for SciAxis 2021, we had 4 keynote speakers, Apurva Varia, who is a deaf aerospace engineer and a Mission Astro Access ambassador, as well as a mission director for numerous NASA satellites. We had Chris Bosshausen, who is a Blue Origin astronaut and co-founder of Planet Labs. We had Joshua Mealy, who is a MacArthur genius and digital accessibility specialist, and Sarisha Bandla, who is a Virgin Galactic astronaut, as well as their vice president of government affairs and research operations. Now, both 2020 and 2021 had participants joining the conference from all 7 continents, including some neutrino scientists that tuned in from Antarctica. We had 54 total countries in which we had participants from throughout the 2 conferences, which means about 27% of the world's nations had at least someone tuning in to this event. This gave us an incredible opportunity to have a global conversation about disability inclusion. Now, as part of this presentation, we want to have a conversation about how you might be able to organize your own accessible events using some tips that we've learned from the past several years of hosting these sort of events. This begins really with universal design, which is something that not only assists those who might have disabilities, but also just the general public who may be attending your events. This means that not only disabled people will be better served at your events, but everyone might feel more welcome and have a better time understanding and connecting with whatever content you're meaning to share. Now, beginning with physical accessibility, we recommend to make sure that all locations at your event are wheelchair accessible. This means, especially in astronomy, if you're hosting a star party, making sure that if it's on a rooftop, there are elevator access, or if it's outside, that the areas are paved. On the left, we have a picture of the poster hall from SciAxis 2019, which was hosted in a wheelchair accessible space. And this is a photo of a couple of our attendees playing wheelchair basketball. In the middle, we have a picture of our SciAxis Star Party with telescopes at a wheelchair accessible height and in a paved area. Secondly, blind and low vision guide volunteers and tactile maps of the building. This can really help your attendees who may be blind or low vision in getting around. Guide volunteers can be trained and to be on hand in case any blind or low vision attendees request assistance in locating conference rooms. Accessible seating. This can mean avoiding high-top cocktail tables, which can be difficult for participants to reach or require standing for long periods of time, which can be difficult for those with chronic pain conditions, and comfortable armchairs, which again helps individuals with chronic pain conditions and just your general attendees. We also recommend a quiet room, which can be a sensory-friendly room. At SciAxis 2019, we had puppies in this room, hence the picture in the bottom right from 4 Paws for Ability at OSU, in which neurodiverse attendees and all attendees could go in and get away from the hustle and bustle of conference activities. Again, this showed the benefits of universal design in that not only did our intended audience of neurodiverse attendees really appreciate this, but everyone who came in and got to take a break from the conference and play with puppies said that this was a really great stress-relieving activity. Now, for accessible communication, we highly recommend sign language interpreting and cart captioning at all events. Cart captioning means captioning that is done by a live human captioner, which means that it's higher quality than automated captions. Secondly, braille and large print materials, which can help your blind or low vision attendees. Slide descriptions, such as what Anna and I have been doing, where you describe pictures that are on screen. This can help when saying things like look here or as you see here doesn't work because someone in your audience might not be able to see what you're talking about. Color communication badges were something that we used at SEDS 2019. There were small flags on the name tags that indicated communication preferences. Red meant I'm not interested in talking to people right now. Yellow meant I'd love to speak to people I already know. And green meant I'm here to network and I'd love to speak to anyone. Again, this helped not only individuals who might get overwhelmed in social situations, but everyone. Now, finally, on this slide, we have pictures of 2 planetarium shows featuring accessible practices. On the left is a tactile planetarium show featuring tactile models, and on the right is a traditional planetarium show with an ASL interpreter. Now, intentional inclusivity is a really important practice that we recommend for all events, in-person, online, STEM, non-STEM, no matter what. Intentional inclusivity can include practices such as putting pronouns on all name tags, as shown in the photo on this slide. This particular name tag has pronouns in a specific font and color scheme that was accessible to individuals with dyslexia. And by including pronouns as an option on all name tags, so individuals at registration were asked to provide pronouns or opt out, this helped normalize the practice. And when we use this at SEDS 2019, we found that the vast majority of individuals did choose to include their pronouns on their name tags, which was really great. Now, another really important point is diverse speaker representation on panels. If you're a panel organizer, it's really important to make diverse representation on panels a priority, but even as an individual, you have the power to make this difference. If you're invited to speak on a panel and you're a white person and it's all white people, or if you're a man and it's all men, if you're able to, suggesting to the organizers that someone with a more diverse perspective can take your place. Now, if you want to learn more and connect with others in the industry who are passionate about STEM inclusion, we encourage you to join the SciAxis Working Group, which is, as we mentioned earlier, a collective of professionals that meets monthly to discuss new developments and best practices in accessible STEM. And the links to that will be provided at the end of this presentation. Now, those are the first 2 branches of SciAxis that we're going to be talking about today. Anna is going to be covering the second 2. On to you, Anna.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. So yeah, the next up we wanted to highlight for you all today is the SciAxis Zenith Mentorship Program, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, is an opportunity for blind high school students who are interested in learning more about space. We've partnered with the Ohio State School for the Blind and the Ohio State University to create this organization, first at OSU, but our goal is really to branch this out and to bring in new partners and create new chapters around the world. But to start things off, we actually founded this during the pandemic in 2020. And because of that, this program is set up in an entirely virtual way. So students from anywhere in the world connect weekly with mentors who they're matched with at university level. So we have college students as well as PhD students who are in space science related fields, working one-on-one with blind students around the world who are interested in learning more about outer space. And there's many ways that we do this. One of the primary tools we use are tactile 3D models. And to do this, we work with a nonprofit organization called C3D, which actually specializes in creating and distributing 3D models around the world. And we really love working with them because we actually send a kit, a tactile space kit home with every single student that they get to keep after the program is finished. And on this slide, I'm showing a variety of different astronomy 3D prints. Starting in the left-hand corner, we have a constellation coin. Next to that is the James Webb Space Telescope, a tactile model of the sun, the Hubble Space Telescope, and then the next row shows that tactile planetarium dome that Caitlin mentioned earlier that we featured at SciAxis 2019, the Mars Curiosity rover, a solar system model with scaled sizes of the planets, and a tactile map of a spiral galaxy. And that last image actually comes from the Space Telescope Science Institute, which has a really great software that they've developed for taking images from the Hubble Space Telescope and turning them into 3D models. So on this slide, I'm showing a close-up picture of a full 3D model from the Space Telescope Science Institute being held in the hands of a student from the Maryland School for the Blind. Another event we've done with our Zenith scholars that we really loved and are excited to continue doing things similar to this program was a live event with the International Space Station called an ISS Downlink. So this is when astronauts on the space station answer questions live from students in the community. And so we had many students with disabilities actually asking questions that were basically saying, could I, with my specific disability, someday go to space and be where you are now? And it was really actually fascinating to see these astronauts from outer space basically saying, today, unfortunately, no, but tomorrow, yes. And we need to work together to make that possible. And so to that effect, I'm really excited to end our presentation today telling you a little bit about our newest project, Mission Astro Access, or Astro Access for short. Now, Astro Access is something that I created last year in partnership with my co-founder, George Whitesides, who is the former CEO of Virgin Galactic and former chief of staff at NASA. And George and I put this creation together basically because we really wanted to start collecting data and start actually doing real research on what changes need to be made in the space industry to make it possible for astronauts with disabilities to be a part of it. So we're really starting to look at who gets to go to space and why, and what barriers exist. So we want to identify those barriers and start breaking them down. Now, this is actually put on by a team of over 50 amazing organizers and volunteers from a variety of institutions, including volunteers from NASA, from multiple space companies, from Zero G, which I'll talk about in a minute, as well as MIT and a number of other academic institutions. So Zero G, or the Zero Gravity Corporation, is a US-based aerospace company that takes a regular plane and flies it in parabolic maneuvers that create the sensation and the real experience of microgravity. And so at the top of each parabola, you actually float in a zero-G environment for about 25 seconds. And then you experience hypergravity on the way back down and the way back up. And this maneuver is repeated 15 times during a regular flight, which is what we did. Now, for this opportunity, we selected 12 ambassadors with a variety of different disabilities and STEM backgrounds to create a really diverse crew that could start doing experiments and demonstrations in a microgravity environment to showcase what accessibility accommodations need to be done. On this image on the right-hand side, we see Mary Cooper, who is a student at Stanford and one of our youngest Astro Access ambassador who was selected for the program. She was demonstrating taking her prosthetic leg on and off in microgravity, and that's what's being shown on this slide. Mary is one of 12 fantastic ambassadors who were competitively selected through a national application. So this was an open call application. And so we received many folks pouring in with their applications. And we ended up with this crew of 12 for our initial flight, which took place just last October. So this is a brand new project that started at the beginning of last year, actually. And we had our first parabolic flight on October 17th of 2021. And so I wanted to show a few images from that flight. Here are some of our ambassadors floating. You might recognize on the left Apurva. He was one of the keynote speakers that Caitlin highlighted. He also served as an ambassador investigating ways that deaf future space explorers can have accessible communication. Next to him is Victoria Modesta, who is a bionic pop star and artist, because we really think that it's important to include arts in any STEM initiative. And so we're really interested in the way that arts and space communicate with one another. We have on the left Zubi, who is one of our low vision ambassadors, who is an inventor and tech specialist who's working with a brain control technology that is designed to zoom in as an assistive reading device for folks with low vision. And he was joined by crew member Dr. Mona Minkara, who is a professor and who is researching a number of ways that blind crew members can orientate themselves in a microgravity environment. Here is Cece, who is a Paralympian and a U.S. veteran, who is one of our mobility crew members. And a lot of our mobility crew did a variety of tasks that were focused on station keeping and figuring out how folks who, would use wheelchairs on Earth navigate a space in microgravity. Because when we're talking about space, there's no such thing as walking, right? And so it's a totally different ball game. And so what disability looks like on Earth is very different when we're talking about a space environment. And so we're exploring the ways that these environments can be made accessible. And one of the things we really found is that very few changes were needed. And that was a big takeaway from this project, is that very few changes were needed in terms of making it a safe and successful mission. Also, members from our mobility crew here are Eric Ingram and Dana Boyce. On the left, Eric has bright blue hair and is walking along the side of the cabin. And on the right, Dana is climbing on ropes with prosthetic arms that end in hooks to practice different ways that folks can navigate inside the cabin. And behind her is NASA astronaut Katie Coleman, who is one of our support members on the ground crew. We have a really awesome network of over 30 partner organizations supporting this, and we're always looking to bring in new members and new individuals. So that includes folks who have expertise, who might be interested in sponsoring a flight or sponsoring students and participants, and who really just want to be a part of this. And so that's really the note I'd like to end on, is inviting everyone to take part in this mission and take part in making space accessible. And it's not really just outer space, right? But it's also about the spaces we're in our everyday lives, in our institutions, in our workplaces. I really want to end this presentation by challenging everyone to critically think about what accessibility looks like for you and what it looks like where you are. And so we'll end on this concept, because really at the end of the day, accessibility is important, not because it's nice, but because it is necessary. And that's really at the heart of all of the work we're doing, is the belief that this is needed. And as Caitlin discussed, if these designs aren't just for marginalized audiences, they're for benefiting everyone. Because when we use universal design and create systems that serve the broadest set of people possible, we are inherently creating benefits that can support all users. And so some questions we'd like to leave you with for today are: what accessibility barriers do you witness in your company, work, academic institution, and what can you do to change them? So how can you implement universal design where you are and in your environments? So that's something that I think if each and every one of us, is working towards, we can create a really important generational impact in terms of who gets to take part in space and who gets to take part in STEM more broadly. And so lastly, space removes barriers between people. And so the idea with this project is that it's now the time to remove those barriers to space itself. So with that, we want to thank you so much for your time. And if we have any time for questions and comments, we'd love to spend the rest of our time chatting with all of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'd be happy to take some questions and comments. Thank you so much, Anna and Caitlin. You are an inspiration to me to do better and think critically about how I am making spaces accessible. I really appreciate all of your thought and advice that you've put into this. We have some good questions in the chat already, so I'm going to bring them up. There we go. Cameron asks, does this program also include those with mental disabilities? He says, I may have missed this.
Yeah, no, excellent question, Cameron. Yeah, so, and I'm really glad you brought this up because I didn't really touch upon the next phase of the program. So as I mentioned, we've done one flight so far. For 2022, we actually have 2 new parabolic flights planned. One is with MIT and their team, and another is an open flight that we plan on having an open call for applications. As with the first flight, this call will likely be open to anyone who identifies as having any type of disability. So that's how we did flight 1, where we had folks with any type of disability apply. And then in the end, we decided to focus on the 3 kind of areas of sight, hearing, and mobility. That's sort of where we got the biggest response. But we do really want to expand that and branch out into other projects. And lately, in fact, we've been talking a lot with a group that really wants to do a neurodiversity flight and wants to have a full crew of folks who are doing research on neurodiversity. And so that's something we're really excited to explore and look forward to including in our future flights. It's a really great question.
Amazing. And the next question is, what are some challenges or successes you've had with accessibility for online events?
Yes, super great question, Laura. Thank you so much. So one of the great things that we see in these virtual platforms, first of all, when it comes to pronouns, is that you can put those in your name, just as you see a lot of folks. I think we have up right now. Yeah, so you can see putting the pronouns with the name is really helpful, and that's essentially the online translation of those name tags. And it's also great, as you see here, we have an online ASL interpreter, and that works really well for virtual events. And in fact, I think that virtual events in many ways offer more accessibility than the in-person, because it's something that has no cost or disability barriers when it comes to travel, right? And so I think that there are actually a lot of benefits to virtual programs, and we really encourage folks, as we kind of go back towards a world of in-person conferences, to, at a minimum, think about a hybrid approach where there's some way folks who maybe cannot physically get there can still engage virtually. So I think that's a really great method to keep in mind, and that when it comes to virtual environments, they are really well set up for interpreting and for captioning. And we've actually developed a set of guidelines for anyone hosting a Zoom event who wants to make it accessible. So if you're interested, do feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to share those as a SciAccess resource. So really great question.
If I may actually add on to that,
Yes.
there, some of the successes we've had specifically from online events is just, well, something that we really like to drive home is that these disabled communities are often a community of completely untapped potential, especially in STEM, since, as Anna went over in the beginning of this presentation, there are individuals who are in these communities and they're trying to get into STEM, they're trying to get into these professions, but a lot of times there are just many barriers against them. So when you provide these resources and these activities that are accessible to them, such as events that we're putting on, outreach events that we're putting on that have ASL interpreting, that have captioning, and have these sort of accessible resources for these communities to use, you end up seeing a lot more attendance from these groups, because it's kind of an ongoing joke in the ASL or in the deaf community of, when there's some restaurant, there's some activity, there's some event that offers ASL interpreting, all of the deaf community goes there, because there's just so little opportunities for them to be able to communicate in a language that is easiest for them. So there's so few opportunities for interaction in these communities, that when you provide them the resources that just allow them to interact like they should be able to, you get a lot more engagement. So that's something that is definitely a big success for online events, where we're able to reach these communities more widely.
Our next question is, how old do you have to be be qualified for an application?
Great question. Right now we do have it set at 18. So it is for anyone 18 and older. This may evolve, we may expand it to have, a student flight at some point, but right now it's for anyone at age 18 or older. And for flight one, we set it so that it was folks at that time who were inside the United States. So you did not need to be a citizen. You could be from anywhere. But we basically, because of COVID travel restrictions, had it so that you had to be living currently in the US. Depending on how COVID evolves and how things change, I'd love to open up that more broadly, but that's still to be determined as of now. That aspect. So really great question.
Amazing. And do we have time for one more question? Yeah, are you good with that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Us. Yeah. We're good. Yeah.
Wonderful.
No, we get to decide that.
Yeah. No. I was really excited you brought up James's question, because I was looking at that one. So
yeah, it's a really good one, and I can really relate. It's been amazing to see a lot of the deaf community joining us this weekend, and thank you for coming. We're so excited to have you here. So we're going to work to improve even more next year, and please feel free to give us feedback on how to make this conference more accessible for you. Go ahead. I will read out the question for you. From James, I've worked with leaders in various industries, and the conversation often comes back to value. This perceived value, I'm often at a loss on how to talk to people who prioritize return on investment above all else. Do you have any recommended resources to help with those conversations with people who I have to convince to develop more accessible platforms?
Excellent question, and we absolutely do. So can you currently see my screen? Is this
I
sharing?
can't, but I can bring it up.
Awesome.
Now you can.
There we go. Perfect. Great.
I'm just going to bring down the question. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. And so one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about as much as we usually like to is the fact that it is very valuable to be accessible. And so there are numerous studies on this that I recommend sharing for those individuals who are really focused on that, return on investment attitude. And so one study shows that reported improvements directly resulting from accessibility reforms included productivity gains, quality improvement, boosts in innovative capabilities, benefit of diverse perspectives, and broad increases in employment engagement and improved economic profit margins. And the source for this is at the bottom here. Specifically, this research was done in regards to neurodiversity. So a lot of companies are realizing having neurodiverse employees is actually really beneficial in multiple ways. And when we're talking about specifically profit and the financial benefits of being accessible, one thing you can share is, another great study that was done basically comparing workplaces that they qualified as accessible versus those that did not meet those accessibility requirements. So an independent study was done basically assigning what they call the Disability Equality Index. And those that had high scores on this were found to be 28% more revenue than their peer companies. And so that's what's shown here on the left. And then when we're talking about net income, it was actually 2 times more income, the accessible workplaces compared to their peers. And lastly, here in terms of their overall profit margin, there is a 30% gain in terms of the accessible workplaces versus their non-accessible peer workplaces. And so this is something that I recommend sharing when you're trying to convince folks of the importance who they might not, they might think, oh, it's too costly. Really, it's costly not to. And that's the message that I would want to convey to those audiences. Great question.
We have a question for the deaf community here. I'm not sure if we are not from the deaf community ourselves as speakers, I don't believe. Are you, Anna or Caitlin?
No, I am not.
I think it might be a question for someone else other than us. Sorry, Cameron. I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, Anna and Caitlin. It's really been a pleasure having you here. And thank you for the inspiration and the knowledge you shared with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We really enjoyed being here. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you very much for having us.
All right, we're going to swing into the closing remarks now. Sorry, Caitlin, I'm working on. There we go. So thank you so much for coming to the second day of the Ascension 2022 Space Conference to Infinity and Beyond, Innovation in Space. It's been a wonderful day. For a quick summary, it's been a whirlwind. We had Katie Gwozdecki kicking us off with the keynote from Sinclair Interplanetary by Rocket Lab. She spoke about their rocket designs and satellite component designs. Then we went into our our first panel of the day, actually, Women in Space. It was incredible. We were celebrating Dr. Roberta Bondar's 30th anniversary of her flight into space, Canada's first female astronaut. Then we went into our speaker series, including Dr. Chris Lenhart, Dr. Cecilia Lung, Dr. Shauna Pandya, Dr. Andrew Higgins. And then we went into our first workshop of the day with Clinton Senkow, and our second workshop was just wrapped up with Caitlin O'Brien and Anna Voelker. We also highlighted some of our student research projects, including the Reduced Gravity Experiment, the Arctic Expedition, and the Stratospheric Balloon Challenge. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to be a part of SEDS-Canada, you can volunteer with us. Dana and I are both volunteers, right, Dana?
Yes.
How do they apply?
So you can apply on the SEDS-Canada website at seds.ca/join, and we have all of these open positions, and even some that will be on the Ascension team for next year. So we highly encourage you to check that out if you're interested in getting involved with SEDS-Canada. SEDS-Canada also has a bunch of outreach programs. You can scan this QR code that's on the screen, and we offer support with creating space clubs and organizations at your schools. So we highly encourage you to check that out.
can also...
Oh, go ahead.
No worries. If you want to help host Ascension 2023, that is something you can do, especially if you're part of a student group that's related to space. Please apply by scanning this QR code and let us know why you'd like to be a part of next year's Ascension conference. You go ahead.
We also have a really exciting raffle draw for you to participate in. If you are attending the conference today, you have the opportunity to enter a draw to win a microgravity flight with our sponsor, Stardust Technologies. So we highly encourage you to enter this competition because it's quite exciting. I know I would want to go on this flight as well.
Applications close at noon tomorrow. So if you haven't filled out the Google form, please do. We'll be announcing the winner at the closing ceremonies. And this is a little sneak peek at what's happening tomorrow. We're going to kick it off at the same time as today at 11 a.m. EST. We'll give you a welcome, and then we're going to have a keynote from Stardust Technologies. We're going to kick it off with two speakers, Dr. Jamil Sharif from MDA, speaking about the Lunar Gateway and Canadarm3. Then we're going to also have at the same time Dr. Keith Vanderlind on how to map a universe. Then we're going to go into an interactive Q&A session on developing a commercial spaceport in Canada with Maritime Launch and Steve Mathieu. Then we'll have our networking expo, so you can check out all of our amazing student teams and grab some lunch. We're going to then go into some more speakers, Dr. Mariek Schmidt talking about navigating Mars rover datasets, and Dr. Hilding Nielsen on astronomy, space, exploration, and colonization. Then we have our exciting 3-minute thesis competition with 3-minute talks where students present their space research thesis and to a general audience, and you all get a say in who wins. You can vote at the event. Then we're going to have our networking industry expo and finish it off with exploring music of the cosmos with Dr. Matt Rousseau and our closing keynote from the Canadian Space Agency, Eric Vachon, and our closing remarks where we'll announce the winner of the microgravity draw.
So tonight we have a very exciting game night. You should have gotten an email regarding the link to attend this. We'll be playing online games like Scribble.io, and it'll be a really great chance to network and meet some of the other attendees at this conference.
I'm going to be there, so I hope you come. You can make other friends who also love space.
Sorry, go ahead. Right after this, we have the annual general meeting. So if you are a SEDS member, you will have gotten an email about this as well. It will be taking place on Zoom. So that is happening in about 15 minutes. And we'll be going over some of the SEDS projects and other highlights of the work we've been doing this year.
So see you at 6 p.m. so you can have your say in what SEDS-Canada does next.
I also saw a question about recordings, and we'll be providing recordings to some of the talks afterwards after the conference.
It's not showing the next slide, Dana.
Oh. I think that's the last one.
Oh, okay. Then we're all set. So I'll see you guys tonight at 6 p.m. for the annual general meeting if you're a member. And see you tonight at 9 p.m. for the game night and tomorrow for the last day of conference at 11 a.m. You can reach out to conference@seds.ca if you have any accessibility issues or need help with anything. Thank you so much for coming today, and we'll see you later on tonight.